This is Sony's PXW-X70 camcorder. Now you may be looking at that and thinking, that looks rather familiar. Hold on, haven't they just stuck an audio handle on the top of a CX900, their consumer model? Well, no. You see, Canon did that with the HFG30. They stuck a handle on top, gave it XLR audio and called it the XA20. But don't be deceived, because Sony have done a lot more than that with the CX900. Yes, it kind of looks like a CX900 with a handle on top, but if you turn it round and just look at this side, you suddenly think, hold on a minute, that whole bulge here, that wasn't on the CX900, and it's the first clue to the fact that this is much more than a CX900, the consumer model, with a handle on top. It is, in fact, the entry level of Sony's professional line, and once you start to look at it and play with it, you realise exactly why it is that it has earned that XDCAM tag, which they have here on the body. Let's start with having a look at the things that are the same, though. Yes, it's largely similar in profile over here. You've got the same lens here. It's a Carl Zeiss 12x optical zoom lens that is f2.8 to f4. It's listed as f4.5, but when you zoom in fully, it goes down to f4 on the screen. You've got the single control ring here, which is focus or zoom, and you can adjust that by flicking that switch here, auto or manual focus button, and then a little control dial here you can use to adjust your exposure, and precisely which bit of the exposure you adjust is determined by these buttons here, iris gain and shutter speed. So you press one of those and then tweak the little dial and it changes the setting. There's a menu button here for getting into the menus, little headphone jack there, the flip out screen I'll come back to in a second. On the back you've got the battery, obviously. You've got ND filters, actual ND filters that you can switch in of your own accord here, 0, 1, 2, 3, and that means that when you're filming in bright light, obviously you put the ND on. When you're filming indoors, you take the ND off. The auto manual switch here doesn't put the whole camcorder into auto or manual. It's purely auto exposure or manual exposure. So you can still be on manual focus while that is switched to auto. But when you do switch to auto, the camcorder is taking care of the iris gain and shutter, and you will still have to physically switch in the ND if the camcorder starts flashing ND2 or whatever on the screen at you to tell you what it wants. Viewfinder then on the back, now that pulls out and lifts up, and I'll come back to that in a second because there's a couple of annoying things about that. And then on the back here, full-size HDMI, power in to charge it, start-stop recording. Look at this, SDI output. Now that is a pro feature. It enables you to connect this camcorder to all sorts of professional studio grade gear, and it makes this, in effect, a bit like the XA25, a little tiny TV studio camera in miniature. And then you've got this little joystick here, which you can press to go through the menus and so on. Obviously, hold the camcorder, it's standard like that, but because it's got this extra bulge on the side, it does make it an easier camcorder to grip than either the CX900 or the AX100, which you may recall is the 4K version of the CX900. All these model names, very confusing. On the top here, a decent zoom rocker, again, much better than the consumer model, and you've got two buttons here. Now, these are assignable buttons. That one is by default the focus magnifier, much better placed than on the consumer model, which had it here, which is very awkward to reach. So you've got focus magnifier there and a push auto iris there. So when you are shooting and your hand is in the trap like that, it is quite easy to press that button, less so that one, but you can just about do it. Either way, it's nice to have them, and it is nice that they are assignable buttons. And then finally, you've got an assignable button here, which by default is digital extender, which I wouldn't bother with. I've reassigned that on this to be the stabilizer mode button, because you don't press it that often, so it doesn't matter that it's slightly inconveniently placed, but it's nice to have it on a button. And then at the bottom here, quick rattle through all the features, there's a microphone input for a 3.5mm jack. If you've taken the handle off and you don't want to use the internal mics, which are up here, you can just plug in a normal stereo unbalanced mic on the 3.5mm jack. And then there's this mini USB type connector under here, which I think Sony call a multi-USB. It is not, sadly, a LANC control port. There is no LANC control port on the whole camcorder. I am told, or at least I have read, that if you buy a collection of different cables from Sony, you can plug one into there and then another cable into that and then another cable into that, and it makes it a lank controller, but it is a rather convoluted process, and it's slightly annoying. So Sony, please just give us a normal, I think it's a 2.5mm jack, isn't it, for a lank controller? Just a little one somewhere that we can plug a normal controller into. That would be very helpful. Oh, and while you're at it, Sony, this loose lens cap, that's not good. I will lose that. So it would be nice if you had something like the Canons have a little switch on the side of the lens hood, and you just push that up and it puts a shutter across the lens. That would be a much better way of doing things. Okay, so that's the outside of the camcorder, and as you can see, it has various improvements over the CX900. There's an easier to hold body, you've got the handle with the XLRs, you've got the assignable buttons, thank you, because on the CX900, you see, there's only on-screen touchscreen buttons. There's only 3 of them. It's a fiddly process, it's a right pain, so it's nice to have buttons that you can just configure and then have them at your fingertips. Now, inside the camcorder, when you flip open the screen, and let me point out another slight annoyance of this, every time you open the screen or you pull out the viewfinder, the camcorder switches on, whether you want it on or not. And even though there is a power on-off button, if you open the screen, flip out the viewfinder, it powers on. That's very annoying, and I don't know why they've designed it like that. So again, Sony, if you're watching, please just let us use the power on-off button. I don't want it switching on every time, or make it a menu option that you can set whether it acts like this or not. So, rant over, let's get on with continuing the look. Some more buttons in here, more than you get on the CX900, and again, labelled 1, 2 and 3, these ones are assignable in the menus. The defaults they have them set up with, I think, are a bit weird. I've reprogrammed them to give me things like the histogram and the peaking. There's a dedicated white balance button here. It's actually rather fiddly to set the white balance on this camcorder. Once you've done it, you have to go through the menus. Once you've preset A and B, fine, it's then fairly easy to toggle through them just by pressing the white balance button and using the little scroll dial. But actually setting them in the first place, you have to mess about in the menus. The other great improvement over the consumer model is in here, not just one SDXC slot, but 2, and that means you can do simultaneous recording to 2 cards, which obviously in a professional context is very, very handy. If you're filming a wedding and one of the cards is corrupt, then you're in a lot of trouble, but if you are filming to 2 cards simultaneously, then hopefully the second card is not corrupt and you've still got your footage. Alternatively, you can do the relay recording, which it starts by filming onto one card, then switches to the other one, and so you can film for hours and hours. That is all good. Now, inside, it's not just the sort of physicality of the camcorder that's different from the consumer model, but the firmware inside. Firstly, all the menus are different. Gone are the sort of cartoony graphics that you get on the CX900. It's a much more professional looking setup here. I'll just bring those menus up and you can see that you can just scroll through them with the little joystick, and there's all kinds of configurability here you could do, not just the assignable buttons. You can set the camcorder up pretty much the way you'd like it, even down to some fine details such as the gamma curve and the knee curve on the highlights. You can slightly change the way it records the white balance, you know, magenta shifts and green shifts and all that kind of stuff. So these are the kind of tiny little tweaks that professionals would expect in a camcorder like that. For the average consumer, more than they need, but for anyone shooting professionally, very, very helpful. You can also set up picture profiles with different shooting tones and gamma curves on them, so you can do various amounts of adjustments when you're editing. And speaking of editing and why you would be doing adjustments, of course, the other big feature of this camcorder is the recording format that it will do. I mean, it does AVC HD, I think it even does an old standard def DV format, but the big news is XAVC. And yes, you're right, the CX900 does XAVC, but not this flavour. This does 422 colour 10-bit, and that means it is recording colour information in much more detail than the consumer models. Now, the good side of that is that it means you've got a lot more flexibility if you are doing colour grading, if you're trying to make things look filmic. This will have all the colour information you need. It also means if you want to use this as a green screen camera, that it does very well for that. Because it gets all that colour information, it's easier to key out the green and just leave the colour you want. The downside of it, weirdly, is that the XAVC codec this is using at the time of filming this is read by very few bits of editing software. I know that Edius 7 will do it. I think, I may be wrong on this, I think the latest Premiere will do it. But Sony's own Vegas Pro, the latest build, won't read the files coming out of this camcorder. And I don't think Final Cut X reads them at the time of recording this either. You have to use a different bit of Sony software, transcode them to something like ProRes, for example, if you're going into Final Cut. And yes, you can do it, but what a palaver and what a time-consuming annoyance. I believe plugins are coming out that will enable editors to read these files, but at the moment, it's a right palaver. So all my tests, for example, since I use Sony Vegas Pro, all my tests have been done using the AVC HD mode in the camcorder. Now, having said that, it produces some very good images in AVC HD. They're nice and crisp, they're nice and clear. The camcorder does have a tendency, I think, to overexpose in certain circumstances. So, for example, a lot of the highlights get clipped off quite nastily, but as I've said, you can adjust all the settings in this so as to sort of roll off the highlights a bit more gently and give you a bit more control over how the camcorder shoots, so that's fine. Other things it has while shooting, quite a good stabilization system. It's either off, it's got standard stabilization, which doesn't do an awful lot, but if you're standing still and just holding the camera on quite a wide zoom, it will stabilize it a bit. And then the active stabilization, which crops in a little bit on the image, but it does mean you can do some very smooth walking along shots, either holding the camera by the handle or holding it by the strap on the side. You do get some nice smooth movement, and certainly when you are zoomed in full, that active stabilization comes into its own and does hold it very steady indeed. The other thing that the camera boasts is clear image zoom, but it is implemented slightly differently in that you can have, on the consumer model, the CX900, if you turn the stabilization on, the clear image zoom would automatically be activated. That's not the case in this. You can have them completely separate from each other. What you do notice with clear image zoom is that, yes, it is still a full HD image apparently. It works by cropping out a 1920 by 1080 section of the sensor, and the sensor has so many megapixels, it doesn't matter. It can still give you a full HD even when it's giving you this 24 times clear image zoom. But you do notice that the image isn't as crisp as when you are simply zoomed in using the 12 times optical zoom. But that's the trade-off you pay for having 24 times if you switch the clear image zoom on. So that's stabilization and zoom. We've covered the picture quality and the fact that you can't actually edit the best quality pictures. Other things that are slightly annoying about this, well, apart from the fact it switches itself on when you open the screen, weirdly, even though it's a really small and light camcorder, the weight of the camcorder is a bit odd. It's all sort of slightly front forward. So even though it's really light, you feel it, especially when there's a microphone in here or any accessories on the front, and it's pulling it down. So as you're holding the camcorder, obviously you want to hold it level, but your arm will typically be at a slight angle as you're holding it away from itself. So you end up twisting your wrist, and it's really painful. I mean, surprisingly so. So you end up sort of having to balance it with your left hand like this. And yes, you can bring your arm back so that it's more straight, but then your face is pretty much practically into the flip out screen like this. So I don't know why. It's such a little camcorder. It shouldn't be a problem, but you really do feel it tugging forwards on you like that. What else? Oh yes, the viewfinder. There is a sensor in this so that as you bring your eye up to the viewfinder, it switches the LCD screen off and switches the viewfinder on. And I found, while I was out filming, that even standing sort of at this distance, trying to look at the screen, it detected I was behind it and turned the screen off. I had that happen a couple of times, so that was slightly annoying. I'd like to be able to switch that functionality off and just have both the screen and the viewfinder on at the same time. Other slightly irritating things about this, when you are zoomed in, oh my, do you have to turn this ring to get focus? I mean, you just keep having to go round for miles and miles until eventually, there's focus. It's fine when you're zoomed out, the tiniest touch, and it goes through the entire focus range. But zoomed in, oh my, just be prepared to do a lot of this, and of course, wobble the camera at the same time. So if you're trying to do a nice rack focus, where you've used the zoom to give you a bit of shallow depth of field, you're probably going to wobble the camera a bit as well. I think that's pretty much all of my gripes with it. Let's not mess about with this. It is a great little camcorder, and particularly so at the price. This is retailing here in the UK for about £1,900, including VAT, sales tax. It's astonishing to get this much functionality for that type of price. So it is a compact, professional spec camcorder that you could use for news, documentaries. You could do some filmic stuff on it, I suppose. You can get a shallow depth of field if you zoom in a bit and use those ND filters carefully. And then, of course, with that colour information, you can do all sorts of nice colour grading on it and give it a filmic look. So it's kind of a bit of a wonder camcorder, this. It really is. I mean, sorry if I sound like a Sony advocate here, but it's astonishing that they've managed to pack so much in for this price. And also, of course, next year, that is 2015, they're saying there will be a paid upgrade to make this shoot 4K, because of course the little AX100, which is very similar again, shoots 4K at the moment. This one doesn't yet, but there will be a paid upgrade. What flavour of 4K that will be, what kind of bit rates, and again what the format will be, at the moment is unknown, as is the price of that upgrade. But if you are looking for a compact, lightweight, low cost, incredibly low cost, pretty fully featured professional entry-level camcorder, here it is. Thank you for watching. I hope this long ramble was useful to you in some way, and if it was, please do give the video a click on that like button, as the likes are always appreciated. If you're not already a subscriber to my channel, then please do click on that subscribe button. It is free, and YouTube will let you know whenever I upload any more videos. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.